Holt, and she's going to talk to us about her family. Her great-grandfather was on the search committee for the Fairhope Industrial Association. Is that right, Bonnie?
That is correct.
Okay, you want?
I just wanted to say that I am the fourth consecutive generation member of the Fairhope Single Tax Corporation, as we call it now. I still think of it as a colony. And as Flo has said, my great-grandfather, who was a member of the Fairhope Industrial Association in Des Moines, Iowa, where it was all started, was one of two men sent out to find a site for the Fairhope Single Tax Colony. And I'd just like to read from the history of Tama County a little bit about who this man was. S.S. Mann was born in 1929 in Sussex County, New Jersey. The family emigrated to Delaware, Ohio, where his father still lived, having lost his wife. Then they came to Spring Creek Township, Tama County, Iowa in 1866. Mr. Mann was an ordained minister of the Christian Union Church, in politics a greenbacker or anti-monopolist, and has served as Justice of the Peace. In the spring of 1852, Mr. Mann started a 6-month journey from Columbus, Ohio with an ox team across the plains to the golden lands of the El Dorado in the far west. He was quite an adventurer. He arrived at the mining camps at Nevada on the North Fork of the Eula River on the 6th of October, 1852. He returned in the winter of 1855 on steamers by way of the Isthmus of Panama. He has always been an ardent defender of labor. He was nominated for the state representative by the National Greenback Convention and endorsed by the Democratic Party. And he really, I think all of the Manns like to travel. He did come with Mr. Bellangee to find Fairhope, and then he moved here. And I have some a few little ideas he had about what he wanted to do when he got here. He said, "Dear son," this is written to my grandfather, T.E. Mann, who is back in Iowa. Incidentally, my grandfather, T.E. Mann, was also a member of the Fairhope Industrial Society in Iowa, and very much interested in what was going on down here. So his father wrote to him from Fairhope, "Dear son, yesterday morning I mailed to you mementos for the new year. The white rose grew in our house yard. All others I gathered from the forest and are evergreen and blooming." And then he goes into some of the ideas he had for industry down here. And one, he says, "There is also the prospect in regard to exceptional opportunity of sheep raising, or the cashmere or angora goats. Also see an excellent opportunity for a variety store." Then I found this, and I haven't a clue what it is, but it says the Kiefer pear, grown by S.S. Mann of Gladbrook, Iowa, in Fairhope, southern Alabama. And this, I think, appeared in an Iowa paper. And it says, southeast of the city of Mobile, 13 miles, is what is known as the Single Tax Colony, situated on the east coast of Mobile Bay, and the climate most salubrious in the world, the atmosphere being freighted with ozone from the action of the pure water and the odor from the pitch pine and the water pure and soft. These pears were grown on 4-year-old stock, and for keepers and preserves as well as for flavor. They cannot be excelled by any other fruit.
Well, I'm curious about that. I had come across the Kiefer pear, a reference to Kiefer pear a few months ago. And I'm wondering, I knew of two kinds of pears in Fairhope as a child, and one was what we call the sand pear, and the other was an apple pear. That's what we called it. And
we had
what is a kefir pear like, and how is it different from those two?
A kefir pear is a large pear, and it has a kind of a rosy cast to it when it gets ripe on the tree, and after you pick it, about a week or so, it becomes mellow.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a good eating pear, and it's also good for canning or whatever you want.
Mm-hmm. So it's not the apple pear. The apple pear is
No.
shaped like an apple but tastes more like a pear.
This is more pear-shaped.
More pear-shaped. Okay. Thank you. That fills in a little bit of Fairhope's history.
Yes, it does.
Okay, go ahead, Bonnie.
Well, I have here a couple of letters. One was finally my grandfather, who was a newspaper editor and a teacher. He really didn't, these were not wealthy men. He didn't have a lot of money, and it took him a long time to actually physically come to Fairhope. But when he came, he felt as though he were in heaven, and this is a letter he wrote back to Iowa to a niece. Ever present is a sense of being refugees from the wintry blasts of the north, hiding away down here under semi-tropical sun. After enduring 70 winters in the north, I go about dazed with the contrast with the winter here. My meanderings about this beautiful Fairhope is accompanied by the music of the mockingbird in its crescendos above the whistling pine tree leaves. From my pathway along the shore, we can see the white caps of the sea and hear the rhythmic lap of the waves against the sandy beach. Does sound wonderful, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Very poetic.
And here and there, the bedecked by varicolored roses, the violet, the narcissus, the magnolias and azaleas. The cricket also is in evidence of a friendly climate with its chirp by day and silent night. In other words, we are living in a winterless fairyland. And then he has something to say about the people. He's talking about my mother and father and me. We were all here at that time. The community spirit is fine here, intelligence far above the average, due perhaps to the coming of a particular people from many states and even Canada for a winter stay, mostly people having leisure or hobbies on which they ride into authorship or into the lecture platform. Almost every shade of political and religious belief have advocates here, but in all this is a give and take. There is a give and take spirit that is splendid and interesting, and I think that's really what has made Fairhope so unique for all of us is that it has attracted interesting people. But you know, it wasn't always sweetness and light down here. They had many periods of controversy, and I think my great grandfather was he was more interested in the commerce of the region. As I say, he was an adventurer. He loved to travel. He was in and out and back and forth. He had 17 children by 2 different wives, and then he finally married a 3rd wife in Fairhope. I think her name was Mary Mead, but that didn't last very long. I think he was getting old and a bit cantankerous then. And at some point, there was a question about breaking up the colony. I think more than once, probably, Ruth, don't you think?
Yes.
And my grandfather, who had deep feelings, although he was never able to spend a great deal of time here, wrote to my great-grandfather, and I thought this was kind of a tender letter, trying to get the old curmudgeon into line, I think. And he says to his father, written from Iowa to Shuah Mann in Fairhope, your boys take pride in the prominent part you had in the organization and forwarding of the Fairhope movement that has attracted the attention of the economic world. They do so much wish that you have full credit and honorable mention in the history of that movement. What better memorial to your life and the family name than this? More lasting than marble enriches. So for your sake and our pride, we would rather not aid in the dissolution of the Colony Corporation. Much rather, we would aid in the preservation and success, that it might stand an impressive reminder of the honorable part our father had in its forwarding. And
What is the date of that?
I don't know, Ruth, but then my grandfather says, word from LeCount, which is another son who was interested in the corporation. He favors the corporation and indicated that he has written to Mr. Gaston, so with a smile, and I think his farm was on the where the organic school grounds are now. With a smile, donate.
Where the school is now, or where it was?
Where it is now, because there used to be a little building, you remember, that was his little house there for a
down
long
south
time.
of Fairhope, or right down on Fairhope?
Where
Avenue?
Faulkner is now.
Where Faulkner is now. Okay.
With a smile, donate the pecan grove to the colony. If you can't smile, make the presentation with as much grace as possible. Then forget it. You cannot well take care of it at a distance. And I guess what happened was that Mr. Fels finally purchased that land and did give it to the colony. Then we have here, this is a diary I found of my mother's, it may have been her first trip.
You want to hold that up? That's a cute little diary.
Sure, it's a cute little diary.
Close in on it here.
And I
Okay.
think it's interesting because I was with her at this time. We used to come for the winter, and in the late 20s and early 30s, up until the Depression, when we really couldn't afford it anymore. And we would leave from Iowa usually right after Christmas and stay in until April, the same way I do now. But my goodness, I don't believe they had a moment to themselves. I've never heard such activity. Fairhope at last, 11 a.m., house hunting till 3:30, selected fine home on Kiefer Street.
What year was this? I missed that.
I think this was 1930,
Okay.
but they had been here before and a time or two after. Mrs. Higgins, then on and on these names, that we still recognize. Mrs. Higgins, with assistance of Mrs. McLean, gave or was it McLean? McLean, I guess, isn't it? McLean.
It's both.
Gave the Messiah, enjoyed it, busy getting settled. Just on and on. A few days later, Mrs. Harwood's playlet was enjoyed at the community luncheon program. Mr. Grassfield and blah, 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 and cast here. Grassfield's for rehearsal. Sang lines of Old Lang Syne, tuning fork. We do pretty good harmony.
Oh, that's great.
Dinner guests with the Bennetts in their pretty log home. Mr. and Mrs. Rosencrantz from the country. Baby went to Christian Science Sunday School. From the forum yesterday, I went to the Playhouse to hear Mrs. McLean's lecture on the message of music, illustrated with records, folk music, on and on, day after day, everything. Fonts and I were guests at the pagan breakfast at Mr. Joseph. Now, the Unitarians here, I believe, grew out of what my family called pagan breakfast, because I can remember that when we were here, that the group would go around to different homes and serve a very light breakfast of some kind. I remember my mother made tons of cinnamon toast to serve to this group. And there was a discussion, very similar to the Unitarian services. I asked Joyce Totten about that. She said she didn't remember it ever being called a pagan breakfast, so maybe that was just the man version of it.
Yeah, I love it.
And then, let's see, we entertained 22 for breakfast at my house, read the book A Room of One's Own, served coffee, donuts, and Connecticut cinnamon toast. I addressed the forum today, subject nothing to wear. Do you remember the community luncheons every
yes.
week on
Yes.
Wednesday?
Yes.
And then there were folk dances that...
And
that
Emma Wood always was the one that managed those, and that's Jimmy Gaston's
Mhm.
grandmother.
Well, this is Theater Guild met at Dr. Gaston's. Now, my mother was a professional actress, my mother and father both. And she was very good. She didn't usually tell people when she went places, but they found out some way or another. And I think the only time I ever saw my mother act was when they did the Shakespeare play in the gully right behind us here. And they did The Merchant of Venice, and she played Portia. And I remember my grandfather played one of the attendants, and they dyed long underwear to to make the period costumes. And, it was
That works.
quite
I
a
went to
production. You did?
Uh-huh.
You saw that?
Uh-huh.
And then another year she came back and she directed a play. I forget which one it was. She also directed plays in Bay Minette, and I think for the high school here. Incidentally, my grandfather, T.E. Mann, invented a printing press. They called it the Mann hand cylinder press. And both the Fairhope Courier and the Bay Minette paper were printed on that press for a long time.
Well, how about it?
And when I came back to Fairhope some years later, Corny Gaston was so sweet when he entertained Alan and me, he and his wife Marge. And he really told me a good many things that I'd forgotten because I was pretty young when I was coming down here. I did go to organic school, part of a year or two, and it was quite an experience. I hope that the fifth generation of my family will be my daughter Allison, who owns a lot down here and looks forward to coming here and living someday. And she will be the fifth generation.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Okay, well that's quite an interesting background. A lot about your family, and they were a very important part of Fairhope's beginnings.
And Fairhope was very important to them too. I think it was, I had a family reunion here, what was it, Ruth, about 10 years ago, I'd say. And they came, I think we had about over 50 people here, and they came from as far away as Alaska and California, because they had heard about Fairhope all their lives too, and were very anxious to see it, and will undoubtedly come back again for another reunion.
That's great. Okay, let's hold it right there for just a minute. 4 certificates of membership in the Single Tax Corporation and the Fairhope Industrial Association. Bonnie, you want to point out what's what?
Well, this is the original.
Bonnie, you want to point out what's what?
Well, this is the original one from the Fairhope Industrial Association, which was my great-grandfather's, Shuah Mann. And this is my grandfather's, Thomas Mann. And this is my mother's, Floy Mann Schermerhorn. And this is mine.
Okay.
And I hope
4 generations.
down here will be my daughter, Allison Holt Knight.
Very good.
Someday soon.
Okay, let's look at this little picture on the side here. Here's a picture of Fairhope and you think Section Street, and that's the pump in the middle of the street. Is that what that is? Or? Okay. So that's
Mashon
Mashon store
and the post office.
and the post office. Let's see if I can get out of the reflection here. It's kind of hard. Okay. Okay.
And this is what we call a lobby display. It used to be displayed in theater lobbies. This is my mother, Shuah Mann, when she was touring.
Get a close-up. Here we go. Miss Shuah Mann, the frame-up. Oh boy. Okay. That is beautiful. I love it. Oh my, that beautiful pose.
They did have pretty figures, didn't they?
Yes, there was more substance to them.
Oh, yes.
They were probably shorter than we are. I know my mother was 5'2" and I'm 5'6".
No, she was not short.
Okay.
It's a portrait of Shuah Mann, who was on the search committee with Mr. Bellangee. Bellangee?
Bellangee. That's what we've always
you
called
say?
it.
I've always said Bellangee, but then I realized.
Beautiful beard. Oh my, my, my. Getting a shot of your dishes. You said that were your mother's. They're beautiful.
My mother's, some of my grandmother's.
And grandmothers. They're beautiful.
My grandmother.
And grandmothers. They're beautiful.
My grandmother was blind, and they used to get the divided plates for her so she could
Oh.
find her food.
Let's see now. Is there one displayed here?
Up on the top.
Yes,
the
there it
sides,
is. There it is. Okay. That's nice. We've been photographing this or videotaping this in Bonnie's living room in one of the older houses in town. Ruth, I've always heard it called the foster home, but I think that came along later.
Yes.
And that's the front door right there. And this is
It was built by Mr. Mogg, who was a member of the Fairhope Single Tax Corporation. It was built in 1904 when the Moggs came to Fairhope, and they were very good members of the corporation and very religious, and they acquired land and donated it to the First Baptist Church in Fairhope, and it is where St. James Episcopal Church has just moved from.
oh, the land that they
On St. James Street.
Where it's now South Alabama.
Yes. Where the University of South Alabama is now located, the Fairhope branch. And he and his wife lived here until about 1908, and they sold it to a family whose granddaughter
well, now you
is
have
in Fairhope now, and she's called Pinky
Bass.
Bass.
Oh yes,
And-
I know Pinky.
And
right across the street.
her mother was a Sunberg. Her father was a Sunberg. Take it back. And they had the two daughters. The original purchasers from the Moggs. If I think what his name was.
I'll pan on around to the dining room while you're talking. This is a pretty close-up view here in some places.
It's interesting that there's a Moog lane. It's M-O-G-G.
In the kitchen.
But down there, you know.
Is that Mogg?
Is that a different family?
Okay, well, it's a beautiful old place. It's on the corner of Bayview and Magnolia on the northeast corner. And oh, and this is a little bay area here. Thank you.
I want you to fall down, sue me.
I'm sent in from Chicago.
I just turned it off. It's hard. Bonnie, here we are. We've got the camera working again, and let me thank you for letting us tape you, and I hope I didn't mess it up too bad right there at the end, but I think I didn't mess it up too bad right there at the end, but I think, Ruth, you were saying that the columns were brought in from somewhere?
From out of
The country?
the area.
Oh, the area, okay.
They were specially ordered, as I understand it, from Chicago, where Mr. Mogg had lived. And the other materials, he had gone to Summerdale and picked out personally all of the material that was put into it. He had been a dealer in lumber in Chicago, and he picked out the very best that he could find, and they brought it by ox team over here.
Oh my goodness. Ox, oh my. Okay, thank you.
Well,
You got a comment?
Just a little comment
Okay.
on that. I told Ruth this, that actually the model of this house is on Lake Geneva in Wisconsin, which is right near my husband's family's home.
Mm-hmm.
And one time we thought we'd go to Lake Geneva and drive around and see if we could see the house that this was modeled after. And when we got there, we found that all the houses around the lake looked exactly like this. So
Oh, how about that? Okay, here we go. We're recording, and I'm moving the camera around like I'm not supposed to. And we have Jim Gaston in front of us, and Ruth Rockwell in